Hello, space friends. Captain Snuggles here, back in X4 Foundations to answer a question I've seen asked many times over the past few months. That question is, why use carriers? The first time I saw this pop up, I was genuinely flabbergasted, because the power of fighters, and by extension carriers, has been common knowledge for almost 6 years. But after I saw the question asked one or two more times, and read through some of the replies, I realized that there's a whole new generation of X4 players who are still in the process of figuring out their playstyles and building their knowledge base. Which is awesome. Considering we have all these fresh perspectives coming in, and considering there have been some big changes to the game over the years, I figured that instead of just relying on old school common knowledge, I would do a serious quantitative test of the cost effectiveness of fighters, carriers, destroyers, and battleships to see exactly how they compare against one another in modern X4. So, instead of just, why use carriers, our question becomes, in high attention combat, under AI control, how does the cost effectiveness of carriers and fighters compare to the cost effectiveness of destroyers and battleships? Just for background, let me give you a quick and dirty breakdown of why fighters have always been considered generally better than destroyers or battleships. We'll look at the She and the Odysseus, which are both right around the top of their respective ship classes in terms of stats per credit. A Mark II fit blast mortar She deals 3,000 burst DPS, has around 9,000 HP, and costs around 900,000 credits. A Mark II fit plasma flak Odysseus E deals around 5,000 burst DPS, has about 225,000 HP, and costs around 12.2 million credits. For every million credits you spend on She's, you get over 3,300 burst DPS and 10,000 HP. For every million credits you spend on Odysseus E's, you get around 410 DPS and 18,000 HP. She to Odysseus, that's roughly an 8-to-1 DPS ratio and a 1-to-2 HP ratio. That's already not looking great for the destroyer, just in terms of the raw stats. But wait, there's more. Fighters are dramatically smaller and much more mobile, giving them better time on target, greater accuracy, and much better evasion, meaning that both their offense and their defense will be considerably better than their raw stats suggest when compared to destroyers. Same goes for battleships. Even the Asgard barely outperforms the She in terms of raw stats, with about 4,500 DPS and 13,000 HP per million credits. And it's one of the least mobile ships in the game. As for exactly how much of an advantage the fighter's mobility provides, well, that's one of the things we're looking to find out. As for carriers, they just enhance fighters. They repair them automatically, they open up more loadout options by rearming them, and they automate some of their management, making it easier to field large numbers of fighters. Of course, that does mean spending some of your budget on a carrier instead of just more fighters. So you get fewer fighters, but each one is more effective. We'll see how that affects the overall cost effectiveness of the fleet. Now, this is important. Here's one reason why I think old school common knowledge will only get us so far. We are playing in version 7.1, which gave Xenon capital ship AI a huge boost. 7.0 improved the behavior of ships with main batteries, which let us absolutely demolish K's and I's with a small number of destroyers. 7.1 brought the K's and I's back up to par, specifically by enhancing their movement. They move into their optimal firing positions much more aggressively and stay there much more effectively. So, with big updates to destroyers and battleships on both sides, do carriers and fighters still hold their same old advantages? Let's see. I spent a ton of time testing this. The test was to defeat two Xenon fleets, each containing an I, 2 Ks, and about 36 escorts, then destroy a Xenon defense platform, then escape to friendly territory. The test system was Atiya's Misfortune, and the finish line was the Void. I started out by experimenting with a bunch of different fleet compositions, and the first one that succeeded became the budget for all subsequent fleets. The first success was a Shark supercarrier with 60 blast mortar Shis on attack, 20 pulse chimeras on intercept, and 12 missile cobras on intercept, with a total budget of 161 million. I had wanted to test multiple budget levels, but I couldn't, for reasons we'll discuss later. So the fleet budget was 161 million, plus or minus 5%, as measured by the custom game creation property screen. I think that's a totally reasonable budget for a fleet at the stage of the game where you can choose between carriers, destroyers, and battleships. Within that budget, I tested 1 fighter-only composition, 6 carrier-fighter compositions, 6 destroyer-only compositions, and 5 destroyer-battleship compositions. All the loadouts were standard: blast mortars and pulse lasers for the fighters, tracking missiles for any medium ships, and either plasma flak or beam flak for the capitals. The main metrics of success were pretty simple. Could the composition win once? And, if so, could it win twice in a row? I labeled the one-time victors as lucky winners, and the two-time victors as reliable winners. For each winning run, I measured the time to completion and the percentage of the fleet's value that was lost. The overall results: the fighter-only composition was a reliable win. Out of the 6 carrier-fighter compositions, 4 were reliable winners, 1 was a lucky winner, and 1 lost. Out of the 6 destroyer compositions, 2 were lucky winners, and 4 lost. Out of the 5 destroyer battleship compositions, 5 lost. If we're putting numbers on it, that's 75% for the carriers, 17% for the destroyers, and 0% for the battleships. And bear in mind, I included the station assault specifically to give the fighters and carriers a handicap. If we're talking just ship-to-ship combat, the differences are even greater. So if you don't care about the details, there's your takeaway. For ship-to-ship combat, destroyers and battleships simply do not compare to carriers and fighters. I tested this at the 160 million price point, but I'm personally confident that for any carrier with a full complement of competently fit escorts, you will not get better anti-ship performance from any equivalent value of battleships and destroyers. Period. Now, if you want the details, have a look. In the top left, we have the best fighter run. In the top right, we have the best carrier run. In the bottom left, we have the best destroyer run. And in the bottom right, we have the best battleship run. The clips are scaled so that the relative time they take in this video is proportional to the relative time they took in-game. They're not perfectly synced to one another due to my CETA usage, but they're close. The fighter-only composition is 120 blast mortar Shis on attack, covered by 48 pulse chimeras on intercept. The carrier composition is a Shark with 64 Shis on attack, covered by 16 chimeras and 12 Gorgons on intercept. The destroyer composition is a layered attack setup. A Phoenix E flagship with 3 Ray wing leaders on attack, with 4 Odysseus E's and 2 Phoenix E's divided up as subordinates to the Rays, all on attack. The Rays have ion nets, the others have standard plasma flak loadouts. The battleship composition is an Asgard with plasma, flak, and 2 tracking turrets, escorted by 5 Rays, 3 attack and 2 defend, each with 1 ion flak and 1 ion net. If you're curious as to how I developed any of those compositions, ask me in the comments, because while I've been yammering away, the action has already started. The fighter and carrier fleets have both already beaten the first Xenon fleet and are moving on towards the second. They both got that first victory before the other two fleets could even reach the battlefield. So there's a tremendous difference there. The fighters and carriers are more or less neck and neck. They take about the same amount of time in combat. The carrier can get to the battlefield faster, but it has to recover the fighters afterwards. So, all in all, it all evens out. Carrier and fighter are about the same. Meanwhile, with the other two fleets, the destroyers have brawled their way through the two Ks and have finally assembled a decent firing line to take down that eye. They took some losses just because of that initial engagement with the Xenon fleet. They got a little bit out of position, took them some time to assemble their firing line, but they finally got there and have taken down the Xenon fleet. Meanwhile, the Asgard, it's had to sacrifice a couple of arrays to get here. It still is not engaged with the main battery, just with its plasma turrets. More on that later. But it has managed to take 1K down. It's taken hull damage, but it's brawling its way through, slowly but surely. And now, finally, it's starting to line up a shot on the eye. Meanwhile, the other two fleets are already moving into combat with the second Xenon fleet and are chewing through it handily. I don't even have time to commentate the destruction of the eyes, because they just get taken down in one volley. Destroyer fleet is moving on to the second system. The Asgard has gotten caught up, mopping up an H that wandered onto the battlefield, but that's not a meaningful threat to an Asgard. It is finally moving on to the second system. Now, the fighter and carrier fleets are both moving towards the station, the Xenon defense platform. They're both neck and neck at this point, but this is where they diverge a little bit, because I have to be really methodical about my positioning when engaging this station. That's something I learned in the opening trial and error phase of this experiment. And so I have to really, really be picky about where I deploy and engage from. And that sort of small-scale maneuvering is, well, much better suited to fighters than carriers. So you can see they're already attacking the station, stripping its turrets first, and then will eventually be going after the hull itself. Meanwhile, the carrier is still just getting into position before doing the same thing. So that small-scale maneuvering is really what sets them apart. So while the fighter and carrier fleets have both defeated both the Xenon fleets and moved on to the station assault, the destroyer and battleship fleets are still struggling just to make it to the second Xenon fleet. They've both finally jumped into the second system. They've both been briefly delayed at the gate by these wandering Ks. The destroyers faced one, the Asgard had the bad luck to face two. All the fleets at some point had to deal with these just single solitary Xenon capital ships wandering around. Ultimately, they posed minor delays but were no big deal because they're just isolated ships. Even when two of them pop up at once, like with the Asgard here, they're not working in unison. They are somewhat isolated and they're disorganized, which makes them easy to take down. Just a minor headache, just a delay. That is contrasted with what happened when the Xenon act in unison, which you're about to see in the bottom left with the destroyers, as the two Ks rocket forward in travel drive, pull right up into close range, and immediately start brawling my destroyers. Anytime this happened, one or two of my leading ships died, and it happened a lot. Eventually my destroyers would stabilize and get the upper hand, but the initial clash is heavily Xenon favored. Case in point, the bottom right, what's happening to the Asgard right now. The Asgard here does everything right. As soon as the Xenon get in range, it turns and blasts the closest one with its main battery. But the Xenon advanced as a group very quickly, just burning in with the travel drive, immediately forming a triangle around the Asgard, pelting it with graviton blasts, and this is the problem with the Asgard. Always has been, especially now. It physically cannot rotate fast enough to take down all 3 of these ships before they destroy it. Even with the support of the rays here, it just can't do it. So it dies, and the writing is on the wall for the Asgard fleet. Meanwhile, as I said, the destroyers do stabilize. You can see they formed a firing line here and are just raining down fire on this K. They've already taken down 1. They're taking down the second one now. And, assuming they don't die, they will pivot around to the I and do the same thing. On the Asgard side, the last couple of rays are still alive and kicking, but this is their last stand. I'm just grabbing a couple of screenshots before they go down. The fighters, of course, have already finished. They finished a while ago. They had some trouble actually closing it out, getting into the void. A couple of them got caught on the gate, but after they took down that last wandering K, they wrapped it up. And speaking of wrapping it up, the carrier now has destroyed the station. It's just withdrawing its fighters and is about to move into the finish. The last couple of rays have died, and the Asgard run has ended in failure. The Shark is going to pull off a nice orderly withdrawal from the combat zone, getting itself and its fighters across the finish line unscathed. Which leaves the destroyers, which have finished off the second Xenon fleet and are finally moving on to the station. This is what destroyers excel at, and I give them a helping hand by manually spreading them out around the station, as I've shown in previous videos. That does break one of the rules I had set for myself, but at this point in the experiment, I felt so bad for the destroyers that I just felt compelled to help them out a bit. The rule I broke was that I would only issue combat orders via the fleet commander, no micromanagement of subordinate. Aside from this one instance, in this one run, I stuck to that rule. I did have another successful destroyer run in which I followed that rule, but one destroyer did die to the station in that one, as opposed to 0 losses against the station in this one. So, spoiler alert, the footage is pretty boring from here. Just 6 destroyers slowly whittling down a station. Instead of trying to invent commentary for that, I want to take this time to cover a few odds and ends that we haven't discussed yet. First off, I should mention that all ships had 3-star captains and veteran crew. I should also mention that I tried most of the capital ships with both the standard plasma flak loadouts and what I call DBAD loadouts. DBAD, don't be a dumbass. So called because they're designed to prevent the ships from floundering around ineffectively. The concept is simple. On ships with a main battery, you just give them entirely anti-fighter turrets, generally beams and flak, so that their only anti-capital weapon is their main battery. By eliminating the choice of multiple weapons, you eliminate some of the delays from the AI's behavior, which improves the time on target with the main battery. It works. Main battery usage is faster and better with DBAD loadouts, but not that much better. Maybe 50% effective utilization as opposed to 30%. On the whole, that wasn't a good trade-off. DBAD loadouts performed almost universally worse than standard plasma flak. Now, let's cover a few more details rapid fire. With carriers, the one failed composition was when I tried to use torpedoes to cheese my way around the station defenses. It didn't work. The defense drones eventually caught me, and the Shark's cargo bay couldn't produce enough torpedoes to destroy the station anyway. Also on the carrier side, I tried a Raptor composition and a 2 Condor composition, both of which were very fun, but just couldn't work as quickly as the Shark. With the destroyers, the best ship was the Ray, because it's incredible at stripping surface components while still being reasonably affordable. Its damage is a little low, but it more than pulled its weight when paired with harder hitting ships. The worst destroyer was the Sin. Not surprising considering this is a cost effectiveness test and the Sin has the lowest stats per credit of any destroyer. The Asgard, on the other hand, has decent stats per credit but still underperformed. We already covered its main issue, which is that it can't turn fast enough to deal with multiple serious threats simultaneously. I tried to cover for that in various ways, including bringing 2 Asgards. It didn't work. Now, moving on to general takeaways. First off, the Xenon have gotten really good at their initial charge. Those Ks, and even the Is, can consistently pounce and pick off isolated segments of your fleet while it's still getting into position. The slower and clumsier a ship is, the more likely it is to get isolated, and the less likely it is to be able to escape from the Xenon charge. So, fighters' mobility advantage looks more important than ever, and of course their raw stats are still very impressive. Both of those factors led to their absolutely dominant performance here. You may have noticed 2 things though. First, they took some losses in transit, especially as they scattered out after jumping through gates. And second, when they ended the run, they were extremely beaten up. Another serious fight would have been catastrophic. So you need to have some way of repairing them periodically. Carriers solve both of those issues, providing safe transport and mobile repairs. The carrier composition was able to win battles just as quickly as the fighter swarm, and it was faster on approach. It just lost time in the really fine-scale maneuvers within the battlefield. Personally, I think that's worth the trade-off, but there's certainly some appeal to the raw brutality of pure fighters. Either way, the carriers dramatically outperformed the destroyers and battleships in this test, with a 4-to-1 advantage in overall success rate, a 4-to-1 advantage in ship-to-ship combat times, a 30% advantage in transit times, and 60 to 80% fewer losses. Some caveats. First, low attention combat. At this stage in the game, most of your fleets will be in low attention, and although fighter swarms are still excellent there, you're more likely to lose a stray fighter than a stray destroyer, meaning you'll face more off-screen attrition. Second caveat, lag. Few ships lag less than many ships. So in the ultra late game, using destroyers and battleships might extend the life of your CPU. Third caveat, ship modifications. Mods on bigger ships cost the same but provide more benefit, and at some point that will make the big boys competitive with the little guys, although reaching that point will take a whole lot of mods. Fourth caveat, you're not obligated to care about cost effectiveness. It's a single player game, do what makes you happy. And my final talking point, bugs. I encountered a lot of bugs. Version 7.1, specifically Hotfix 3, seems to have broken the target identification system. Any command that requires a ship or turret to identify a particular type of target seems to have a chance to completely stop working at any time. I've documented it with attack fighters first, attack fighters only, attack capital ships first, shoot missiles first, intercept and bombard fleet assignments, and attack surface elements. It regularly happened to my ships and the Xenon ships, and it made this experiment a colossal pain in the ass. I had to carefully scrutinize every moment of every run to see if anything broke, and if it did, I usually had to start over. That's why I couldn't test multiple price points. Just testing the one price point was way more aggravating and time-consuming than expected. I have faith that Egosoft will get the targeting system fixed, but do be aware that those issues imposed some pretty strict limitations on this experiment. Still, I hope this helps you understand the strengths and weaknesses of various capital ships, and helps you make an informed decision about your next fleet composition. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and don't forget I'm raising money for charity through Extra Life. I hope you'll consider making a donation using the link in the description. A lot of sick kids would really appreciate it, and so would I. Until next time, this is Captain Snuggles, signing off.